Good morning. The gospel reading is from Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 37, and can be found on page 917 in your pew Bible. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice, but a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. When he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis, they brought him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephanesia," that is, "be opened," and immediately his ears were open. His tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So, 11 years ago, 2004, on September 13th. September 13th is next week. But in 2004, September 13th, something started, something happened. Do you know what is marked by September 13th, 2004? Anybody? No? Nobody at all? Next slide. This is what happened. You don't know who this is? Yeah, now you know, right? Caesar Milan, right? That's how you say his name. He is, you want to know what he does, what he's noted for? He's the dog whisperer. Next slide, please. That's right. The Dog Whisperer aired 2004, September 13th, for the very first time. And it's an interesting story. There's a lot of details. If you don't know what he does, if you don't know what a dog whisperer is, let me see if I can sum it up for you in a different way. A dog whisperer thinks that he can talk to dogs, and if they're really angry, he can make them happy again, right? I mean, that's what he does. He's like a psychologist for dogs. And in the show, you know, it's an incredibly popular show. And so he's not a specialist. He has his own methods, but that's what he does. Is these people who have angry dogs or crazy dogs or whatever happens to be would bring in Caesar, and he would, as a dog whisperer would do, make them happy again, right? Make them livable again. And that's what this show was all about. It's a reality show back when reality shows were still just barely getting traction. So this show was put on the fringe of the schedule, right, of the airing schedule, thinking no one would watch it. It was a half-hour show when it aired. And then after 1 year, this show became so popular, they moved the show, this half-hour show, they moved it to prime time, and they made it a full hour long after 1 year because it was so popular. Within 6 years of that, in 2011, it was being shown in 80 countries worldwide. And about a year after that, it actually had a spin-off TV show called Dog Whisperer Family Values or something like that. It was I know, right? It's very weird. But it was that popular. It was that popular. It struck a chord one way or another, and it was viewed on a weekly basis by something in the neighborhood of 11 million people every week, which is a lot. It's a lot of people for any show. It's a lot of people for a reality show. But I think it shows, our affinity towards dogs, right? I mean, our culture, we love dogs. Dogs are a huge part of our culture. And so I was, doing my Google research, and I found a list of the 15 best or top dogs in pop culture. So we can go forward. Sarah here, anyone have any ideas of what dogs might be really popular in our culture? Specific dogs, names. There we go. So we got Lassie would be one, right? Pop culture. Beethoven. What was that? Clifford the Big, right? So they're all over. So here's a list of this 15 most popular dogs. Let's go next. We're going to go to upper left on down. Anyone know who the upper left one is? Triumph, the insult dog. Anyone know what that's from? Conan O'Brien, right? Next one down, Brian. Yeah, somebody doesn't want to admit they know that one, right? Brian from the Family Guy, that's right. And down from that, can you see? Toto, that's right. And down from that, you want to know this one? Santa's Little Helper from Simpsons. There we go. And next column, you have Pluto. And the one after that? Yeah, I didn't know either. Arthur from The Beginners. I didn't hear about that one. Next down, Shiloh. Top is, you have Scooby-Doo. You've got Lady and the Tramp. And then what's that under Lady and the Tramp? Anyone? Nope. Chase and Shadow from Homeward Bound. Under that, Doug from the movie Up, right? Squirrel. Upper right, Old Yeller. Then you have Lassie. And then it's a White Fang. I didn't think that belonged on the list. And then the number one most popular dog in pop culture, according to this list, is Spuds. Rin Tin Tin, Spuds McKenzie, no, and no. Next slide, please. All right. And yes, this list is not a very good list. It's just a goofy Google list because there are, someone said Clifford the Big Red Dog. How about Goofy? Is Goofy a dog or a person? All right, okay. So Goofy, Hooch from Turner and Hooch, 101 Dalmatians, Air Bud, Benji, Beethoven, Marmaduke. Right? We love our dogs. What? Wishbone? Whatever. Sorry, man. I love you. No. Right? We love our dogs in this culture. There are so many dogs in our pop culture. It just shows our affinity towards dogs. In our country, there are 83 million dogs that are owned by a family. How many people here own a dog? Raise your hand. That's close. The number I saw was about 47% of all American households own a dog. Right? And we spend a lot of money on these pets. Next slide, please. You can see on the very bottom, 1995, I think it is, 94, 17 billion, that's with a B, $17 billion are spent on dogs, all the way up to last year, $58 billion, and the expected $60.5 billion spent on food, veterinary expenses, even to like end-of-life planning, like things for dogs, right? How you put them, how you remember them when they're gone. We do all kinds of things when it comes to dogs in this culture. They have our hearts, right? Even people like me, I have asthma. I don't have a dog, but we have this affinity towards dogs. And I think because of that, I don't think we read this text very well. We love dogs. We love dogs. Next slide, please. Today our text, as you already heard, comes from the Gospel of Mark. As promised, we were preaching the lectionary through the summer. Next week, we will move away from the lectionary and go to a sermon series. A little plug, next slide, please. We're going to be doing a sermon series on the entire book of Jonah. So if you don't know about that book, if your kids are curious about how someone can be swallowed by a big fish, whatever, or maybe you have friends that say, you're a Christian, you're crazy because you believe in, like, people get swallowed by big fish, that's nuts. We don't believe that. If you're interested in that, you have friends that are interested in that, whatever, invite them. We're going to talk about that for a number of weeks. But today, we are in, most definitely, the book of Mark. Next slide, please. So the story that you heard, the first part of the reading, which is 24 through 30, is really simple. Jesus is in the city of Tyre because he went up north. Just like you guys go up north, right? He went up north. It's north of Galilee. It's on the north side. He needed to get away. He needed to be away. He needed a rest. So he went, as we say in Michigan, up north. So he's going away. He needs to separate, and he there is still tracked down by this woman. Somebody finds him. This woman who has a daughter, has a child who's sick, who is demon-possessed, and she is coming to Jesus because she knows what Jesus is all about. She's heard the stories, right? She knows who this person is, and she is looking for the very best that Jesus has to offer. She is looking for a miracle. She is looking for a healing. She is looking for the very, very best. And then Jesus says this incredibly offensive line. Incredibly offensive line. And I think that because of our affection, at least in part, at least our affection for dogs, we don't quite see it for what it is, right? And certainly because it's Jesus, we wouldn't expect anything all that negative from this person, Jesus, right? God on earth can't be anything other than the shepherd that we see in stained glass windows up there. So we don't entirely see this text for what it is. Jesus says this, when the woman who asks for his very best, a miracle, a healing, comes to him, Jesus says it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Except for it's not just dogs, right? In the Greek, it's the diminutive. It's not just dogs, it's little dogs. It's little dogs that don't mean a lot. That's reading into it a bit, but it's certainly not just dogs. It's a certain kind of dog, maybe even a house pet kind of a dog. A lot of commentators even say this, and this will offend some of you, and I apologize. But I think to really know how offensive this is, this connotation of Jesus saying that even a little female dog, you don't get anything. It's an offensive line. It is that harsh. And this person that we talk about every week, this person who died on the cross is, well, not very nice today. It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Next slide, please. We'd prefer to think of that, right? What happens when you feed scraps from the table, crumbs to our dogs? It's a lovable puppy. Here's a little treat. These are homemade treats I found at some homemade treat site. Next slide, please. Or maybe some of you as kids do this. Right? Feeding crumbs from the master's table kind of a thing, right? And it's laughable. It's fun, right? Who hasn't done that and made some dog sick, right? Some kid accidentally feeding chocolate chips or something to the dog. That's what we would prefer to think of, but that just isn't what's being said. See, what's really interesting about this is this woman knows who Jesus is. Jesus is Jewish. He comes from a long culture that studies and lifts up the law that comes from the Hebrew Bible, our Old Testament, the first 5 books, and this woman knows very well. You see, I think that when this woman hears Jesus be that derogatory to her, what does she do? She steps up in his face, right? She steps up in his face and says, even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. Even the dogs. Now, we often interpret this and have a pretty good message, I think, in our culture to say, yep, guess what? Everyone's welcome, right? Everyone gets a little something from God, everybody. But this woman isn't saying even the dogs get a little something. No, she knows darn well that his culture and his Torah and his law says the visitor, the wanderer, the one who's coming to you asking for something doesn't get just the scraps. They get the very best. Next slide. Jewish culture has this word. Everyone pronounce it for me. Go. All right, next slide, please. It's hachnasat orchim. Hachnasat orchim. And it's a tradition that goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. It goes back to Abraham and Sarah, that when there are travelers from another country, weary travelers who come in unexpectedly, people who drop in at your doorstep. Ever try to leave the house and someone's coming up knocking on your door to sell something and you're thinking, this is the last time I want anyone up trying to leave the house? Unexpected, right? Or maybe you're leaving your place of work and someone who's been wearing the same clothes for a number of months clearly hasn't showered in a few weeks and wants some of your attention, and you're thinking, I'm trying to get somewhere, right? That kind of unexpected drop-in. You see, this isn't the kind of hospitality where we where we invite someone to Labor Day weekend, right? And we give them the very best. This isn't the kind of hospitality where we invite people over for Monday Night Football and give them the very best. No, this is the kind of hospitality that is for those who we at least expect are going to show up. For those that we don't even want to show up. This is the kind of hospitality that most of us are going to try to find an excuse, like when you give to your best friend or your spouse, they'll give me the wink so I can get out of this kind of a thing, like you're doing right now, right? Right? That's what we're talking about. The traveler, the wanderer, the one who drops in unexpectedly, you still give them not just the scraps or the crumbs from the master's table. You are supposed to give them your very best. You're supposed to stop. You're supposed to open up a place at the table. Next slide, please. Right? Even to the point in some Jewish traditions where when you set a table, you still set a table with a plate where no one's at, just in case. Anyone set an extra spot at the table just in case someone dropped in? Make an extra few hamburgers just in case someone dropped in? See, this is the kind of hospitality that this woman knows is expected of Jesus. She knows that she's not supposed to just get the crumbs, she's supposed to get a spot at the table. She's supposed to get the very best. And she knows it, and she calls him on it. Now, that's kind of offensive to some of us, or at least it's certainly uncomfortable. I mean, if this doesn't make you squirm, then you're not hearing me, or I'm not saying it very well. If you don't write me an email on Tuesday morning saying, well, I don't want to just open up my home to some homeless person, right? If you're not feeling that way, then we're probably not taking it in enough, right? This isn't just about making sure someone has some food or a little bit of shelter. It's actually about welcoming them into your home. That's a radical hospitality. It's one that I would guess most of us, and I will put myself on that list, unfortunately, am not particularly comfortable with. But as uncomfortable as that might make you and I feel, there's a whole other wrinkle to what's going on in this text that I would probably get in trouble if I didn't lift up. Did anyone hear what the definition for this woman was? We know she speaks Greek. She's a Gentile, but there's another word in the NRSV that we read that defines the background of this woman. Did anyone catch that word? Syrophoenician. Next slide. What does that mean? Kurt Struckmeyer, you can't talk. Where's she from? Right, next slide, please. Syrophoenician. You know she's Phoenician. Next slide, one more. Syria. Been watching the news lately? I told you it's a lectionary text. I didn't pick this. I don't always do lectionary. This is what's in front of me. And here we are. We're talking about someone from Syria going to another country asking for their very best because they need it. Now, a lot of those refugees that we see right now, they're not all from Syria, but some of them are. People in the Old Testament who were coming from other lands, stopping on the doorsteps, were from other countries, going from one place to another. They were travelers, they were strangers, they were foreign to the land. You might even say they were refugees. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm really not. I don't care. I do believe it's a Christian statement, though. Do we truly offer our very best for those that we don't want to show up in the first place? Or do we just give them the crumbs from the master's table? A lot to think about and pray about and take in. Next slide, please. Right? Because this is what it looks like. This is a picture I pulled off of CNN this morning. People getting some sustenance, some food, something to help them get along. Next slide, please. In Syria, the refugees are making up all kinds of numbers, going in all kinds of directions, and we hear of the European, like Germany and others, opening their doors. And I saw also on the news this morning and a little bit yesterday, singing songs, welcoming them into their country from Hungary. Do we do that? When that homeless person down the street needs a meal, do we sing praise that they're coming to us so we can help? Do we truly offer our very best in hospitality like that woman was asking for, like that woman who called Jesus out on his own tradition, reminding him what it means? Because ultimately, Jesus did give his very best, didn't he? He healed her without even being present. That girl didn't get the scraps or the crumbs from the table. She got Jesus' very best. Do we give our very best? Next slide. Do you or do I have a place at the table for the most unexpected and maybe even the most unwanted person? This is that radical in my opinion. It's that uncomfortable. It's that unwanted. But that's the gospel. Right? Our tradition is a tradition of refugees out of Egypt. Our tradition is one of refugees, those who don't belong, and we have a God who, through the cross and through resurrection, welcomes us with open arms, even if we think we're unwanted, even if we think we don't belong, even if we think we don't have a spot at the table. Our God says, you have a spot at the table, and we are never, ever turned away. Who gets the crumbs isn't just a certain part of life and a certain part of society. Everybody gets God's best. Everybody deserves our best. Because God gives us God's very best. Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for who you are. A God that always, perpetually, has open arms. A God that has always set a place for us at the table. A God who always invites us to that table. And a God who never forgets us in our spot at that table. We have a God. In Jesus, that through the cross, through life, death, and resurrection, we thank you for him and for what has been done. We thank you for all that you are. We ask that you challenge us. Not challenge us just by giving a few more bucks through a dunk tank or a few more dollars in golfing, but a challenge to truly open up our doors and our tables for those who need it most. Give us eyes to see those people, not just those who are the most obvious, but those who might be sitting next to us in this room, those who we might work with through the week, those who need to experience God's very best through us. Challenge us. Give us eyes to see. And give us the courage to open our door. In your name we pray. Amen.